Yay Networks.
Y'all know I love experimenting with our favorite recipes. How can we make them truly better for us? Taking out the sugar, either removing it or just dialing it back, but still keeping things natural, working with plant-based sweeteners. And a lot of times we focus on baked goods. And now, y'all, we're talking about ice cream. So homemade ice cream. We're going to be sharing some of the tips and tricks that we've developed that are really, they're just a game changer to make low sugar ice cream if you want to just do it that way. And also zero sugar ice cream, again, keeping things totally natural. We've got a lot of information. Also, if you want to make it completely vegan, we've got the information for you there. The hardest part for me right now is figuring out where to get started and how to organize all of this to share with you guys. A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. I hope y'all are as excited about this episode as I am. We are talking all things ice cream, but especially homemade ice cream. So do-it-yourself ice cream. And this is well beyond those of y'all who remember like the hand crank with like the rock salt that you always did. And then you kind of got this like maybe icy mess after you put all this work into it. Ice cream makers have come so far since then. So this whole topic, the whole conversation really started when I was scrolling through the New York Times and I saw, there was a headline that they had, the best ice cream maker. And I thought, wow, like that's a big statement. And if you aren't familiar, the New York Times partners with Wirecutter, and Wirecutter, they test all types of products all the time. This is, if you're looking for the best of anything, fill in the blank. Wirecutters put so many different things to the test, and they break it down into categories. And so this one that we're going to be talking about, and we're talking about so much more than ice cream makers, y'all, but this was sort of the catalyst for this, is they tested 21 ice cream makers. They looked at all types of things like, is it easy to use? How simple is it? What kind of quality ice cream does it put out? And they landed on the Cuisinart Ice 21 was their favorite. It's $69. And then right now in the summertime, they're offering a special that's $45. So you can see that on the Wirecutter website. They have nothing to do with this podcast. They're not sponsoring it or anything, but just to let y'all know, normally $69. It's on sale or special with their promo code. And that is WC Summer, Wirecutter Summer, but WC Summer, and it's on their website. I don't know how long they're going to offer that. So I'm a little hesitant to even say it, but $69, which isn't cheap, but compared to a lot of the other ice cream makers, they're in the 200s, 300s and up. It's relatively inexpensive compared to those. So I got it and I'm like, all right, let's try it. Because first of all, who doesn't love homemade ice cream, And if they're telling me it's this easy, is it really this easy? And then once I did the first batch of just straightforward ice cream, I knew, okay, once I make sure that I can do it, that it's turning out well, that it's everything that I'm expecting it to be in terms of quality, then I can start subbing out ingredient at a time. And that's exactly what we did. So we got to the Cuisinart Ice 21, and there's so many, it comes with like an instruction and recipe booklet, of course, and there's so many different ones in there. But for consistency's sake, all the experiments that I'm sharing with y'all are all done using just the simple vanilla ice cream. Because really, you kind of need to nail like what your base is going to be. And then you can get creative with all the other stuff that we would be adding in. So I started with just the simple vanilla. There's also different versions of it that are going to be like more custard style. And that involves like cooking the egg yolks and stuff like that. So all of those are options in this plus others. So just know that what we're going to be talking about is just super simple, but you can take it as far as you want, like be as creative as you want once you kind of have your own base down of like what works for you in terms of nutritional parameters and needs that you're looking for, and then also the taste perspective. So we'll kind of break it down piece by piece. So we get this ice cream maker, and I'm like, well, is it really as easy as they say? And it is. The ice cream maker is really, really simple. It sort of looks like it might be a little bit bigger footprint than a nice quality size blender. It's probably less than something like a Vitamix, but your normal smoothie blender, a smidge bigger than that as far as like counter space. So we don't keep it on the counter. We'll put it in the pantry when we're not using it, but it doesn't have a really big footprint that it takes up. The hardest part about it is it has the bowl that is like your freezer bowl that you put everything in and you put the mix in, and that's what's like keeping it cold while the ice cream is mixing in there. You have to freeze that ahead of time. It could be at least 12 hours, but they recommend freezing it like overnight. It has like the liquid inside of it. It's like sort of this double walled vessel, and you have to freeze that ahead of time. So for me, that's really the hardest part, is remembering to plan ahead, that you've got that cleaned out and that you've got it in the freezer waiting for you. So if you just get it in and you're excited to make it, just know that you have to wait for that little cylinder to freeze. Truly, that is like the hardest part. So then you go, the steps are super simple. So in sort of a big mixing bowl, you mix together your ingredients, and I'll just say what the regular ingredients are, and then I'm going to tell y'all, how did we make it half sugar? How do we make it zero sugar? And kind of the why. And then also the vegan, completely plant-based version of it. So the ingredients typically are milk, cream, milk, heavy cream, whole milk and heavy cream, sugar, granulated sugar, pinch of salt, and then vanilla extract. So 5 ingredients, basically milk and cream, sugar, salt, vanilla. And when we made that, according to the recipe that just is the standard vanilla recipe, it was so sweet. And that recipe calls for a cup of milk, 2 cups of heavy cream, and then 3/4 of a cup of sugar. 3/4 of a cup translates to 12 tablespoons. And so 12 tablespoons of sugar, the yield I should mention is about 10 little half cup servings. It makes about 5 cups. So 12 tablespoons of sugar was just really, really sweet. So I thought that when I tried it. I had Brad, my husband, taste it, and we both were like, man, that's really sweet. So a good rule of thumb on really anything, baking, if you're making anything that is going to call for sugar or any type of a sweetener like sugar, you typically can get by with definitely 25% less. So definitely a quarter less, and usually half of what that recipe calls for without sacrificing the end result. So it won't be too dull. It'll still be sweet enough. And then also in baked goods, it will still also have the moisture content and brown decently. It may not be quite as much browning or quite as high of a moisture content as the original, but typically a quarter, you're probably not going to miss if you cut back by a quarter. And 50%, try that quarter first, but usually can dial it back 50% in sugar. And that's in baked goods and anything. So with that in mind, we took this recipe, the original recipe that comes with this ice cream maker, and just simply cut the sugar in half. So followed all those other same ingredients, cut the sugar in half. So instead of 12 tablespoons of sugar for the whole batch, we did 6. And then it's so simple. So you take all those ingredients, you whisk it into your mixing bowl. You whisk it until any of the sweetener dissolves. You refrigerate it for, it says to refrigerate it, but if your ingredients are already cold, you're probably good to go with just taking it from there and making your ice cream. But to just kind of follow the rules, I'll whisk it, put it in the fridge for a couple hours, and then take that ice cream maker out, get that little bowl out of the freezer. So again, thinking ahead to freeze that little bowl and then make sure your mixed ingredients, mixing them ahead of time, putting them in that mixing bowl, sticking it in the fridge for a couple of hours. That's your hardest part, is like the waiting game really is the hardest part in planning ahead. So anyway, you mix those 5 ingredients, milk, sugar, salt, cream, vanilla. In this case, we went half sugar. Mix it up. A couple of hours later, take it out of the fridge. You literally pour it into the top of your mixing bowl. So of the ice cream maker. So you've got your ice cream maker cylinder. It has like a little paddle that kind of goes into the cylinder and a whole little clear thing that sits on top of that. It's like foolproof. Like it's so obvious what goes where. So it's that one piece that's your freezer thing, the little paddle that goes inside, your clear vessel on top of that. And you press the button. There's literally one on-off switch, and that's it. You turn it on, you take your mixing bowl, you pour all that liquid that you just whisked into it, And 20 minutes later, you've got basically the texture of soft serve ice cream. So if you wanted a little bit of a firmer texture, more like a tub by, store-bought ice cream, just put it in the freezer for a couple of hours, you'll have that. So easy. And when we cut that sugar in half, it was perfect. And my husband was like, wow, like you don't even miss it. It was perfect. So the reason I started with that one is whatever ice cream maker you're using, if you're making homemade ice cream, just know that if you're following whatever that recipe is and you're like, you know what, I don't want to go any further than that. I don't want to try any of these other ingredients that I'm about to share with y'all. If you want to just go straight forward, cut your sugar, whatever your recipe is calling for, go 50% of it and give that a go. I would also say, don't even tell anybody that you're making it lower sugar and just see what they think. Two tips on that too. I did bump the vanilla up a little bit. So call for a tablespoon of vanilla. I love vanilla. So I make sure as much as possible to use that pure vanilla extract. I find it has just a stronger, kind of more vibrant flavor. And then I went to about just a little bit generous pour, about a tablespoon and a half of vanilla. So just bump that up a little bit. The recipe calls for a pinch of salt. So I did, again, just kind of a generous pinch of salt. That little extra salt and vanilla just really elevate the flavors and you really don't even miss the sugar. So that's number one. How do we make a half sugar ice cream? Really straightforward. You'll know though that I'm always going to look at, okay, how can we use our plant-based sweeteners and make it zero sugar? So there was a couple of things here when I was like, how do we make it truly low carb? And how do we make it zero sugar, low carb? And then ideally, sometimes people aren't, they're avoiding ice cream maybe because of the lactose. So if lactose is an issue for you, what we use instead of just the regular whole milk, you can use Ripple. It's the pea protein based milk. It's lactose free. The heavy cream is trace amounts of lactose. And for most people are able to tolerate cream because it is so low lactose. There's really no carbs or very, very low carbs in heavy cream, which means it's going to be very low lactose. So when I'm looking at how do we make it really low carb and how do we make it zero sugar, there was two versions that I did. One was using a higher protein, lower carb milk. There's several different brands of milk that are basically ultra filtered and the carbs are lower. So Fairlife is one. There's also different brands that you may see at a store like Whole Foods that will say ultra filtered milk. And Ripple, I mentioned the pea protein milk. That one's also a lower carb, about half the grams of carbs as compared to regular milk. And then still using heavy cream. Or instead of using a cup milk and 2 cups heavy cream, you can just use all heavy cream. So I'll say this one is not a low calorie one because of all the heavy cream in there. It's low carb, it's low sugar, but it's not low calorie. So the version that I did of that I liked best was just that. So using only heavy cream. So instead of milk and having those natural milk sugars, we use just the heavy cream in place of milk and heavy cream. And then instead of sugar, I mentioned that the original recipe, 3/4 of a cup, which is 12 tablespoons. So I remembered back to a podcast we did a couple of years back. I'm going to link to it. It was the art and science of plant-based sweeteners and then also gluten-free flours. And we had several experts joining us, including the pastry instructor from one of our local culinary schools. So the New Orleans Culinary and Hospitality Institute is just a wonderful culinary school here. And Chef Zach, the pastry instructor, joined us for that. So our Eat Fit team had hosted a class for our Eat Fit restaurants and chefs and on gluten-free flours and plant-based sweeteners specifically. And the gnocchi instructors were assisting us and helping in that education. And Chef Zach did a little experiment ahead of time. He was doing an ice cream and it was like maybe a berry sorbet. And he did several different versions. He did one with only erythritol-based sweetener. That's what's in Swerve. And there's confectioner Swerve, which is a super silky texture. It doesn't give you a grittiness. And it's primarily an erythritol-based sweetener. And then right at the time we were doing it, the newer plant-based sweetener called allulose had recently come out. And allulose brings a lot of moisture into a product. So it the erythritol based products can give that sweetness. They can make it in a baked good, kind of give it a crispness. They can also have a little bit of a drying effect, which is part of why it makes a baked good a little bit more crispy. The allulose brings a lot more moisture into products. And so for sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good. And so when we did, or Chef Zach did the ice cream comparisons, and he had the erythritol only, it tasted really good, but the texture was a little powdery, a little kind of dry and crumbly. And if you've had some of the store-bought low carb slash keto or low sugar ice creams or zero sugar ice creams, you've probably noticed that sometimes they're a little powdery almost as the best way that I find to describe it. Powdery or a little crumbly in texture. They're not super creamy. If you leave it out for a little bit, they'll kind of like soften a little bit and get a little creamier. But a lot of times when you look at the sweeteners, they may have primarily erythritol as the sweetener. So he did that as one, and we kind of had that kind of crumbly result. Still tasted good again, but a little dry. And then he did one that was a blend of erythritol and allulose, and that nailed it. It gave that creaminess. So it wasn't too much. It wasn't melty. It wasn't gooey, but it was just the right amount of like firmness in that ice cream, but still almost like a really pretty sheen, a really pretty moisture content that it was bringing to it. And it looked so much more vibrant, but it also had that really creamy mouthfeel more than kind of that powdery, crumbly mouthfeel. So as I'm looking at this recipe, and the original recipe calling for that 3/4 of a cup sugar, which again, in my mind, I broke it down to tablespoons because I knew I didn't want to just substitute 3/4 of one sweetener. So I'm like, all right, it's 12 tablespoons of sugar. Let me do a 50-50 split. Let me do half the confectioner swerve, which is primarily erythritol, and it's confectioner style, meaning it's powdered sugar style. So it doesn't have a gritty texture. Actually, the very first version I did, I used the regular swerve, or it might have even been pure erythritol. And even though I whisked it until I thought it had dissolved, it didn't. And while the ice cream that we made first tasted good, you definitely had the graininess of the swerve or the erythritol in there. So the next version said, okay, we've got 12 tablespoons of sugar I want to replace. I'm going to do half of them with swerve confectioner style, and I'm going to do half with allulose. That allulose again being plant-based sweetener, but it brings more moisture. And the result was really, really good. I'll also say both of those, allulose and the swerve, 0 carbs, 0 glycemic impact. It doesn't raise our glucose at all. It's not going to have any influence on our blood sugar levels, on our insulin levels. It's sort of just like a straight line. It's going to maintain us. So, and it's also 0 calorie. So when we're looking at all the benefits of why we would try to choose that, or why we would want to, my goals of why am I going to try to use that as a sugar replacer, that's a lot of why. And again, they're plant-based, they exist in nature, they're extracted from plants for us to then use in an isolated form as a sweetener. So it was really, really good, but I'd say it was a tiny bit too sweet. And what's interesting about swerve, and especially the confectioner swerve, because it's really finely ground, you pick up on the aftertaste more than even the regular granular swerve. And so it can be a coolant effect, which seems weird to say that that's not a great thing because it's ice cream, but it's something that lingers as a aftertaste after you've eaten it. And so we wanted to minimize that. So all that is to say, if you're looking at your recipe, whatever you see on the sugar, you can say, so again, mine was 12 tablespoons of sugar. Whatever your sugar is, replace half of it with granular allulose. And I use the granular allulose, not the liquid allulose. And then replace half of it with a confectioner swerve. But if you're like me and you think that it felt too sweet, so I cut that in half even. So, or almost half. So I did 6 tablespoons of granular allulose, and then I did 3 tablespoons, sometimes 4 tablespoons of the confectioner swerve. So you could just take your sugar and split it 50-50 with granular allulose and the confectioner swerve, and you're probably going to still really, really like it. But if you're sensitive to it and you pick up on that aftertaste, like what we're talking about, Or like we said earlier, you just find it like so sweet. If you're going to dial back on that confectioner swerve. So to keep the carbs down, we pulled the milk, did double heavy cream. And I know that you're like, wait a second, how is that nutritious? It's definitely still an indulgence. It's definitely not something that is, you're not like drinking this and putting it to like your protein drinks. So still, when I'm having it, I'm still having it like it's ice cream, but it is at least the low sugar, low carb. But I'm aware that it's still not low calorie and it's still high in those animal fats. So for that reason, I was like, let me experiment with some plant-based fats instead of heavy cream. Sort of, we've always talked about when you're experimenting with recipe and ingredient substitutions, ideally you want to kind of change one thing at a time so that you kind of know what's what. So again, we started with that recipe just straightforward. How's it turn out? Okay, now let's take it and make it half sugar. All right. Now let's take it and make it zero sugar. All right. So then our next step was, can we make this with plant-based fats instead of the concentrated animal fats of the heavy cream? So I first tried canned coconut milk, like coconut cream that's in a can. And I like specifically the ones that don't have any thickeners, any gums. I found that they just taste better. And so like Trader Joe's has a really good canned coconut milk and it's really thick. You typically can use it instead of cream in something like a soup. So I thought, well, this might work well. What I didn't factor into it though, is that while the canned coconut milk is primarily fat, it's very low carbs, very low protein, it's primarily fat. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, that's like heavy cream, heavy cream or whipping cream, primarily fat. Same with this canned coconut milk. Let me give this a try. What ended up happening though, the result when I used that instead of heavy cream, it was like ice milk. So there's actually a thing called ice milk and it's ice cream, but it's a cheaper way to make it. And it's made with milk instead of cream. And it's really like this. It becomes much more icy because that high water content. So the canned coconut milk, yeah, it's mostly fat as far as the calories are made of, but it had a lot higher water content than that heavy cream does. And so I wasn't thinking of that in that first round. So as it's coming out of the ice cream maker, it was just icy when we put it in the freezer and then took it out after a few hours. You really kind of like had to stab at it with a spoon to break it up. So it still tasted okay, but it also tasted heavy coconut. Like you had to like coconut to like it. And then it had a really icy texture. And part of what I've loved about the ice cream maker that I've been telling you all about, that it is super easy, but the quality of ice cream, it's just like so rich, so creamy, and just like really, really smooth texture. So that was part of what I was really loving about it. So I didn't really enjoy that icy texture. So it's kind of like stumped and I'm thinking, we got to add some more fats, but I don't know how. So I tried different types of nut butters in there and nothing really worked. And then I spotted on shelves a dairy-free, basically a plant-based or vegan version of heavy cream. And there's a couple of different brands out there. The two that I've tried, one is the brand Silk. And typically we think about Silk being a soy milk brand, but this one is centered on coconut oil. And it's basically coconut oil, sunflower oil, fava bean protein, which I'll talk more about in a minute, and then some different gums that sort of thicken and stabilize it. Califia Farms is the other that I saw. And after trying both of them, I really liked the Califia Farms better. And so same thing, it's a vegan product, dairy-free, vegan. And it is, the ingredients are water, coconut oil, sunflower oil, the fava bean protein isolate. So it's something that is one of the things that I kind of compare it to is if you use like chickpeas and you drain the liquid off of chickpeas, you can actually use the liquid that comes off of chickpeas to be almost like a egg white replacer. And so my guess is it's sort of along the lines of this, that they're using this fava bean protein isolate to to thicken it, to add a little bit of bulk, add a little bit of volume and texture in there. And then also, again, some of the natural gums and stuff like that to keep it thicker and then also stabilize it in suspension. So when you look at it and say, what's a simpler ingredient? That heavy cream is basically cream, a one ingredient thing. This does have other added ingredients, the gums and other things, the oils to add more to just that coconut oil. So, it's sort of a toss up, but it is definitely a way to have a plant-based version of ice cream. So it's also a little bit lower calorie, just spoonful for spoonful, about maybe a third fewer calories. It's a little bit lighter in calorie. And again, the Califia Farms is my favorite there. And tested that out and it worked beautifully. The texture is just amazing. It's like that soft serve right as it comes out of the ice cream maker. It still freezes really nicely. It sort of has that tub ice cream consistency once you take it out. I did think, and as I was kind of mixing it, whisking those ingredients in the bowl before I poured it into the ice cream maker, I had the plant-based creamer, the Califia Farms. I had the allulose and the confectioner's swerve. I had that pinch of salt and the vanilla. I mentioned that I had bumped both of those up a little bit anyway. I just think it tastes a little bit better with just a little bit, not a lot, but just a smidge more salt and a little bit more vanilla. So I had already done that. And as I kind of tasted it before I was putting it into the machine, I thought it was a little bit flatter. And I don't know, normal heavy cream isn't high in sodium. It's almost no sodium anyway. So I don't know why it felt a little flatter, but it felt a little bit dull. So I added and when I say a pinch, literally that pinch is what goes in between my finger and thumb. Like it's just a little pinch. And then I added just a smidge more vanilla. So probably 2 tablespoons total. And it was perfect. It was so good, just kind of off the spoon as I was tasting it in there. And then as I mixed it, it turned out beautifully. It's interesting because if you've ever had coconut milk, you know that it's like pure white, like white, white, white. If you put it next to regular cow's milk or certainly next to something like almond milk, you can see the difference in color and it's just pure white. So the ice cream, as it comes out, also has that pure white in spite of having added that vanilla extract. But I think it makes it just like really, really pretty. So in summary, you don't have to have our special ice cream maker. If you are in the market for an ice cream maker, or you're like, I'm looking for a gift, a wedding shower gift, a wedding gift, or you're just like that person who has everything and you're like, what would be something good to get them? I typically don't use gadgets at all. Like they will sit there, maybe, maybe not. I've taken them out of the box. I mean, it's not something that I'm into. Or I find they're a pain, or they might be easy to use, but they're a hassle to clean, whatever it is. All of this is simple. It's easy to use. It's fast. It's effortless. You push one button, you can't mess it up. It's easy to clean. Like I said, the hardest part is putting that little freezer bowl back into the freezer in advance of when you're going to make it. And then once you whisk your ingredients together that are going to go in it, putting them in the fridge for a couple of hours. So as you're like, okay, either you're getting an ice cream maker and you're like, this is really cool. I'm playing around with different versions of it. Or you have one already and you're like, but I use different recipes for my ice cream maker. Still do the same ratios that we're talking about. Whatever sugar it's calling for, or there's all kinds of other recipes that you can make a version of, like, air quote, ice cream in your NutriBullet or whatever that is. So whatever you're using, if you're making any version of ice cream at all, whatever kind of maker you're using, if your recipe calls for sugar, 100%, I feel very comfortable in saying, try it with half sugar. And I don't think that you'll be disappointed. It's one of those things also, give it a few spoonfuls, set expectations going into it, but then remembering if you're going half sugar, bump up that vanilla extract, bump up that pinch of salt just a little bit, and it can really bring out those flavors without adding all that sweetness. So easy, go half sugar. If you're looking to cut the sugar entirely, take whatever that sugar calls for in the recipe and split it 50-50 between granular allulose and this Swerve confectioner style. If you're like me and you're like, it's still a little too sweet, the one to dial back on, my recommendation is to dial back on that Swerve Confectioners, cutting that back another third or half, and you'll still have plenty of sweetness, but you won't have that aftertaste. And then lastly, if you're like still looking to drop your carbs, the only other carbs really in there after you change out the sugar for the plant-based sweeteners, the only other carbs left in the typical recipe are from the milk. So if you're using Ripple, that pea-based protein milk, I like that one the best. I think it more closely mimics or mirrors regular cow's milk in terms of thickness, richness, flavor. So it works well in a product like ice cream, better than something like almond milk, which tends to be really thin. But I also like that it mirrors the protein content of regular cow's milk. So 8 grams of protein per cup is what you'll also get in Ripple, is what you'll get in cow's milk. So one way to drop your carbs is to use Ripple instead of regular cow's milk. Another way would be to use those ultra filtered milks. There's several different brands we talked about. And then the other way is to simply use heavy cream in place of both milk and cream. So again, the recipes typically call for whole milk and heavy cream. And so you could just do away with the milk entirely and just use whatever volume it's calling for total with heavy cream. Again, completely, yes, it's high in calories, it's high in animal fats. So the solution that I think is a very viable solution and still tastes really good, has a wonderful texture, is using the dairy-free heavy whipping cream alternatives like Silk, but my preference and brand is Califia Farms. So half sugar, easy, done. You don't have to have any special ingredients. If you're going to make ice cream anyway, you just do the same deal you were going to do, cut the sugar in half. Don't say anything to anyone. Bump your salt up a smidge, bump your vanilla up a smidge. I think everyone is going to be happy. No one's going to know anything. Taking it further, split that sugar between the granular allulose and the confectioner Swerve. You can always dial that Swerve back a little bit less. And then the milk, using a pea-based protein milk, is going to make it naturally lactose-free or incredibly low lactose. There'll be tiny traces in your heavy cream, making it completely plant-based with the Califia Farms. So it's really kind of up to you of how far do you want to take it in here. And so when we've done the zero sugar with those plant-based sweeteners and entirely plant-based with the Califia Farms instead of heavy cream, we love, 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 love it. I don't think that we're not missing anything. It doesn't feel like we're lacking or we are sacrificing or making a compromise by any means with that. Yet it's zero sugar, all natural with the plant-based sweeteners, and completely vegan, but it's really delicious. It's that rich, creamy texture of homemade ice cream that I think all of us love, but it's just such a hassle usually to make it. So that's my recommendations. If you've listened this far and you say, oh, this sounds fascinating, but there's no way I'm going to get that ice cream maker, or there's no way I'm going to make my own ice cream. And you say, what do I do if I want to buy it from the grocery store? My favorite is the brand Rebel, Rebel, Rebel. It is a low carb, low sugar ice cream. It's kind of middle of the road in terms of calories. It's my favorite in terms of not having an artificial aftertaste. It's all plant-based sweeteners. All 3 that I'm going to share with y'all are going to be plant-based sweeteners. They're 3 brands. It's my favorite texture. It feels more like it mimics a regular ice cream. The next one is Halo Top. Halo Top, you've probably been familiar with. Halo Top now has what they call their keto variety. And I like that one probably next best. And then Mammoth Creameries. That one, it is the highest of the calorie of them. And to me, I like it, but it's often when I purchase it, it does feel, it's kind of got that dry crumbliness to it. And I'll say, y'all, as much as I like the store-bought varieties, and of course you can get like so many different flavors and stuff there that are already done for you. And we've talked about how easy these other recipes are. I mean, this is like as easy as it gets. You go to the store, you purchase it. The ones that I've just shared with you that we're making at home, I mean, hands down, like it doesn't even compare to any of the store-boughts that we've had. When it's fresh out of the ice cream maker, it kind of has that soft serve texture. When we have it in the freezer and then have it, spoon it into a little bowl, it has that tub ice cream texture. But really like an ultra premium ice cream, it doesn't even taste like something that's made to be a low carb option. So Rebel is my favorite of the store-boughts, followed by the Halo Top Keto and then Mammoth Creameries. I think they're all really good. If I have those in the freezer, I am certainly not upset about it. But compared to everything that we just talked about of the homemade ice creams, there's just no comparison. So always, y'all know, I want to hear what you think. If you're trying these recipes, if you try this maker, if you have other recipes or other ice cream makers that you love, tell me. Here's the thing though, it doesn't really matter what type of ice cream maker you have, and it doesn't really matter what your ingredients are in your own recipes, because everything we're talking about is sort of the ratio of how to substitute the ingredients. So the idea that I'm hoping is that you don't have to have this specific ice cream maker or this exact recipe, but you could say whatever ice cream maker you've got, pull out the recipes that come with it, and this is how to modify those. And so you can really do it with anything. And then once you get that base down that you're comfortable with, you like, that's when you can start playing around and adding all types of other flavors, add other add-ins. So let me know what you think. If you're trying out a ice cream maker for the first time, or for the first time in recent years since they've come as far as they have, or if you already had one, but you'd never played around with any of the lower sugar varieties, I want to hear how it goes for you, hear what you think. And if there's other ingredients that have worked for you that are making, still healthier versions of these, of ice cream that still tastes amazing, share that with me as well. I'm registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.